Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome back to the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. It's wonderful to have you with us. You know, over the course of the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to chair a committee that was leading a fairly substantial construction project in Southeast Wisconsin. It was a nonprofit organization. It was about an $8.5 million budget. So for me, that was a pretty big project. And I will tell you, I learned so much chairing that committee. And one of the things that I learned was the absolute imperative of partnering with the right architect, of the importance of design and architecture in a construction project. That is why I'm so excited about our conversation today, which we're going to get into in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to share with you, and as many of you know in our audience, that I have the pleasure and the opportunity to serve on a number of different boards of directors, foundation boards, nonprofit boards, corporate boards. And when I started doing some of my board work, I talked to one of my very best friends, a friend of mine who has served as a lead director of a Fortune 100 company for decades, a friend of mine who led a Fortune 500 company, was even the chairman of a Federal Reserve Bank, somebody with tremendous board experience. And I said, when you join a board of directors, as I'm considering doing, what do you think about? What's important? He said, it's easy. He said, it's three things. He said, number one, make sure that the people you're working with are people of integrity. Never compromise that. Make sure that these are ethical people. He said, number two, make sure that you can add value. It should be about more than just making money or the prestige of being on a board of directors. It should be about you adding value to whatever that organization is. So make sure that your competencies and skills and background and experience are useful for the organization on whose board you're serving. And third, and this is the topic of today's discussion, make sure you can learn something yourself serving on the board. If you can't better yourself in some way serving on that board, it's probably not the right fit for you. So it was that I found myself in a strategic planning meeting about a month or so ago on one of the boards of directors on which I serve. And we were planning our strategy for the next several years. And the individuals that run that company assembled a phenomenal group of panelists that were experts in the world of architecture, experts in the world of construction, world-renowned subject matter experts in their field. And when one of those individuals got up to the microphone and began speaking, sharing with us their insights on architecture, on construction, on design, I knew within the first minute that this was an individual that we had to have introduced to our audience here at the Tech Ed Podcast. That is why it is such a pleasure to me to invite onto and into the studio of the Tech Ed Podcast somebody who we're going to have a great conversation with today. His name is Peter Exley. Peter is the first past president of the American Institute of Architects and is the co-founder of, get this, Architecture is Fun. We're going to learn about that as well. Peter, welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast.
Matt, what a great introduction. And I love that you start by advertising for architects. I couldn't have done it better myself. So thank you for that. It's great to be here.
I want to start, Peter, with your experience as the 2021 president of the American Institute of Architects. Now, I mentioned in our introduction that I had served on this construction committee, actually chaired it for a number of years, been involved in a few other construction projects. I hope you're not offended when I say this. When I thought of the AIA before, I thought of those long contracts, those long forms that are produced by the AIA that you fill out when you're entering into a large construction relationship with a general contractor or with an architect. What I've come to learn is that that organization is about so much more than that. Tell us a little bit about the AIA.
The American Institute of Architects is an organization of 95,000 members. We're based in Washington, D.C., but there are components in every state and in most large cities. And in Wisconsin and Illinois, every part of the Midwest, there is a very, very robust component to the American Institute of Architects. So we really are an organization by architects for architects, and we're helping architects do their best work. We have an amazing strategic plan, which actually began at the start of my tenure at the beginning of 2021. And the fundamental core and ideals of that strategic plan are catalyzing equity and emphasizing climate action. You know, we live in a period of great intensity, of climate crisis, of extraordinary injustices that we need to work on in every community. And oh boy, we've been in the pandemic. So it's been a really interesting time to be an architect. Architects do our best work at a community level. So the AIA is really focused on providing grassroots opportunities for architects to be involved in leadership and to be sharing knowledge about best practices in our communities. And hopefully, if you're listening to this podcast, you know an architect and you work with them. And hopefully you realize that architects are pivotal to building the future and building better environments.
Pivotal, absolutely. I really enjoyed the way that you put that into context, helping architects do their best work, really facilitating the amazing talent that exists in the architectural community, and doing it, as you say, at the community level, at the grassroots level. And in the end, any change that happens must take place at the grassroots level. So really great answer to that question, and a fantastic focus that the American Institute of Architects has. You served as the 97th president of that organization. That blew me away as I was doing a little bit of research for this episode, how long the organization has been around. I've got to believe that the role of architecture in some ways is the same as maybe it was 97 years or a century ago, but that it's also changed. How has the role of architecture changed since the organization was founded?
In a myriad of ways. This Tech Ed podcast, if I think about what I was doing in 1982 when I started at architecture school, it was a completely analog world. There actually was one computer in my university, and it was used for calculating energy use values, R and U values and it was spectacularly slow. It was much quicker to do it by hand. But fast forward to today, everything we do obviously is digital. For sure, I still draw by hand, and my mind is connected to my pen, and my rolls a yellow trace. But it's also connected to incredible software, building information modeling that frankly brings extraordinary value to the efficiency and the detail that comes with the documentation I create in designing a building and visualizing a building, and helping my collaborators and clients get value from that work. So, since the 1860s when the AIA was formed, obviously amazing changes have happened. But even in a generation, it's spectacular.
From spending time in architecture school with one computer, and I was, I think I started at least my post-secondary career about 5 years after that. And even at that point, computers were just emerging, and thinking about where we were back in the 1980s in every sector of the economy, as opposed to where we are now. The digitization of just about everything is transforming every market space, which I think is exciting. We talk at length about people who are disrupting technical education. So we're all about disruption and just making sure that we have our finger on the pulse of the changes that are taking place in as many spaces as we can. And certainly architecture is one of those. I mentioned earlier this construction project that I worked on, but just watching the way that world transformed. We would be in meetings, and literally we'd come up with some ideas, some solutions, move a door here, build a portico share here, change the design of this window. It was unbelievable how quickly, using software, the architects could totally redesign and recreate renderings and so on that could help us understand and visualize the future of this project. So it was really rewarding for me to be part of that building addition and renovation. On the topic of building additions and renovations, you're undergoing a huge one there at the American Institute of Architects, as I understand. You're helping to lead the organization at a time when the national headquarters in Washington, D.C. is undergoing a full renovation. And some of the goals of that renovation I thought were interesting, Peter. The 3 goals that I read about were sustainability, equity, and collaboration, and creating a model, therefore, in this new renovation. Sustainability and collaboration, I can kind of wrap my brain around those goals. When it comes to equity, how does architecture and design promote equity in the workplace?
Well, all those things that you just mentioned, if we look at it holistically, the idea of equity is central to everything. And in my own practice, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, I feel like I've been chipping away at issues of equity in everything that we do. Primarily, I think it's about giving everybody access to resources in their community, not just building in the most privileged and prosperous communities, but building everywhere, ensuring that everybody has access to the best healthcare, the best education, the best housing. We know in America there is an extraordinary housing crisis. There's not enough housing for everybody to live in, and there's certainly not enough affordable housing. So obviously the built environment is critical to creating that equity and creating the places and spaces where we live, we work, and we play, and we all live our best lives. So a building like the AIA headquarters is very symbolic in that respect. The building that you were talking about was built in 1973. At this moment, it still has its original single glazing. It still has its original fossil fuel heating system, and all of its systems are struggling. They're over 50 years old. And as architects, talking about catalyzing equity and emphasizing climate action, we can't live in that place and be preaching atop the mount there. We sound a little hypocritical if the house that we live in is not the best in this age. So we've made a commitment to renovate our home, not to build a new home, but to renovate this existing 50-year-old structure to be net zero, to be the model workplace, and to be a place at the heart of its community. That community happens to be about a block and a half from the White House in Washington, D.C. But part of this redesign is creating public space and access to anybody who's interested in architecture, or anybody who happens to be in that community who wants to use our garden, who wants to use our cafe or our bookstore. It's an introduction to, I guess, a threshold to figuring out what architects do. Part of that equity thing and part of that sustainable thing too is ensuring that we're net zero, that we're doing as much as possible. Obviously on an existing building, adding photovoltaics, solar panels is a good idea. We've discovered that we can't add enough solar panels to our building for all kinds of reasons. So one of the investments that we've made is to do offsets, and we're working with Architecture for Humanity to provide photovoltaics for, I think, 90 homes, 90 affordable homes that they're building. And that's an opportunity for those new homeowners to get the best and latest systems. So to negate their future utility bills, perhaps even eradicate them entirely if they create a good enough system. So that's providing opportunities for affordability. That's building in equity in our community. It's a long-winded answer there, but it's a complex one.
And it's a thoughtful one, and it is a complex issue without question. And I admire the leadership. So great leadership there, practicing what you preach. You talk about it would be hypocritical not to do this. I would say it would also be, it's really a form of leadership in showing people what is possible. Credit to you there, Peter, as well as we talk about things like climate change, as we talk about things like equity. Really, really important work.
Whoever's listening to this podcast, please, you don't need to knock on the front door. That door is open to everybody.
Awesome. So an open invitation from Peter Exley to the Tech Ed podcast community to visit the beautiful headquarters in Washington, D.C. as that project comes along. I want to turn our topic now to some of the work a little bit closer to home, at least my home, which is Wisconsin, your home, which is Illinois and the Chicago area. Let's talk about Architecture is Fun a little bit. You're the co-founder of that organization. That, first of all, is like the most intriguing name for an architectural and design firm. If this architect thing doesn't work out for you, maybe your career in marketing, because that's just a perfect name for an organization. Tell us about the organization, Peter, and a little bit about what you do.
Well, Architecture is Fun. We're, I suppose, a conventional architecture firm with an unconventional name. Architecture is Fun is a reflection of our values, and it's a reflection of our purpose. when we founded our firm in 1994, it's a women-owned business. Sharon Exley, who happens to be my partner in every respect, we're a 24/7 organization. She and I made a commitment to work with mostly community-based, civic, non-for-profit organizations in the informal education space. That's a fancy way of saying we were working with a lot of children's museums, a lot of churches, a lot of libraries, community-based organizations who were supporting children and families, and particularly supporting kids and families who might be falling through the cracks at school, and creating the places where they found their purpose. And in that, we found our purpose. So our very first project was Chicago Children's Museum on Navy Pier in Chicago. We designed 2 of their exhibits, and they've been a longtime client of ours. You know, in the mid-90s, there were about 25 children's museums around the United States. I think today there are literally hundreds. So, Chicago Children's Museum just helped us ripple through many similar communities around the country, in particular in smaller towns, cities where there'd once been a thriving Main Street, and perhaps that had fallen on hard times. And the Children's Museum was often the catalyst for bringing people back downtown. They would find a building, an affordable building with cheap rent, and we would go in and renovate that. And I'm really proud of the work we've done in places like Bangor, Maine, Saginaw, Michigan, Louisville, Kentucky. There's a multitude of places around the country where we've helped their main streets become better main streets. We've helped their city leaders and their business leaders to recruit the best people because there's a great amenity in their downtown. And that's essentially what our practice has done. We've worked with some amazing organizations like the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, with the Field Museum in Chicago, many others, helping them do things at scale and hopefully making a difference and bringing value and being advocates for equity and their mission.
What a really cool focus for your organization. I know how passionate you are about it. I think about our kids growing up, and now they're a little bit older, but spending time at places in Milwaukee like the Betty Brant Children's Museum and Discovery World, and how that sparked interest, and they're finding a sense of purpose, as you put it, and thinking about what they might be interested in eventually. And maybe by coincidence, both of them ended up pursuing STEM education, which is kind of interesting. But just that focus that you have on underserved communities, people that may have fallen through the cracks, as you put it, really, really important and fascinating work. But I want to talk now, Peter, a little bit more about this passion that you have. What is it that you love most about this work? I know there are things that keep you up at night. I know there are things that get you up in the morning, excited to go to work and pursue your mission. What are those things? What do you love about what you do?
As a child, and I think probably many of us relate to this, I love to draw. I love to build things. I grew up on a farm in the north of England. So I had a very rural upbringing, a lot of freedoms, and creativity was just everywhere in our household. My father happens to be an architect, and my mother just really encouraged us to look at creativity as part of our everyday lives. So I happened to be a really great student in school. I was good at math. I was interested in history. I loved art. I had a bizarre curriculum in high school. I was all over the place. Some people were doing maths, physics, chemistry, and I was doing what I loved to do. And it just so happened that I was nurturing left and right brain qualities there. And if you look at most creative people, most people that are builders, we all have those tendencies. And I never thought about anything other than being an architect. Maybe briefly, I'd love to have been a lead singer in a rock band or a professional soccer player, but clearly my talents for those were not as well honed as they were for being an architect. So,
well, you can sing some Rolling Stones or Who for us if you want now. I don't know. Is that?
Yeah, I think you want to maintain your listening audience to the end of the podcast.
Awesome. Well, that's a great background. So from growing up on a farm in Northern England, that must have been just an idyllic way to grow up with a father as an architect, doing what you love, but really a great message, I think, for any of our students in particular who are thinking about career pathways. And a lot of what we do here at the Tech Ed podcast is work to inspire people as they're considering where they might want to spend their career or at least start their career. And so it really is that love of architecture and that love of creativity. I think that is something that people that have that spark in them, it's a career pathway that would be great to consider.
Can I share a thought here, Matt? Maybe it's not a little known fact, but almost 90% of the population create 100% of the drawings that they're going to make in their lives before the age of 10. So that means when you pass that threshold at 10, somebody says to you, "Oh, you're not very good at art," or "You're not very good at music," or "You can't sing," or wow. We need to make an adjustment in how we nurture and encourage our kids. That's remarkable that people stop drawing because everybody drew. Everybody's refrigerator at home is covered in their kids' drawings. We need to say to our children, wow, that's a really interesting way of doing that.
Right. No, absolutely.
And encourage them to keep that going.
Well, and anecdotally, Peter, as you mentioned that, and I agree 100%. And I think about some of the most effective people that I've worked with in my career, whether it's somebody designing a new technical education space in my 23 years in manufacturing, a manufacturing engineer sketching out a drawing of a potential manufacturing process. I actually think about being in Tokyo. This was now 4 years ago, sitting at the Hotel New Otani with the CEO of a community college here in the Midwest with a pencil and a lined piece of paper and sketching out a learning system for teaching students what we call Industry 4.0, or kind of this high-end smart digital manufacturing, and then manifesting that system as a physical learning system that now exists in Sturtevant, Wisconsin. You're exactly right. I mean, there's so much creativity that flows from drawing and so much ideation that flows from putting a pen or a pencil to paper. And if you're right, and I have no reason to believe that you're not, that 90% of us stop drawing by the time we're 10 years old. What a huge opportunity we're missing to let that creativity live and to design and envision a world that could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can apply that not just to creative pursuits, but you should be encouraging everybody to have balance in their lives and to be looking at technical pursuits, creative pursuits, physical pursuits. It applies across the board. Let's not tell our kids, you're not very good at that. Let's encourage them to do what's comfortable for them and to pursue their passions.
Absolutely. Kids and adults alike, for that matter. And, for me, it's interesting, you mentioned about being in kind of a 24/7 endeavor. And we talk about sometimes work-life balance. For me, it's always about work-life integration. If you want to go running at 1:00 in the afternoon, find a job that lets you do that. If you want to have the opportunity to be creative, to take a little bit of time off to work when you're best adding value for the organization, figure out how to do that. That's the culture that we've tried to build into every one of our companies, and making sure that people are finding the balance that works for them. And it's different for everybody, but making sure that you're pursuing those creative interests. Boy, I could go off for another 10 minutes, I think, on that topic, but we'll move on to the next question. I want to talk about your design projects. Your design projects include things like the DuPage Children's Museum, the House in the Woods, the Ronald McDonald House in Oak Lawn, Illinois, Exploration Station Children's Museum, the Young at Art Museum exhibits and galleries, and others that you've mentioned already in this podcast. So of all of these amazing projects that you've had the opportunity to work on, Peter, do you have a favorite? Is there one that you would look to say, this is my favorite project?
No, not really. I love them all. At the heart of everyone is a story, and a story that makes a difference. And they're like children, right? You don't have a favorite one. Right now, we're working actually up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. They've been a client for almost a decade. We helped them move their children's museum when they found themselves homeless about a decade ago. We love working with them and helping them. You talk about the Industry 4.0. We're about to do Children's Museum of Fond du Lac 3.0, getting them from being a small organization dedicated to education in that area to now being an organization that is sustainable and looking at what it means to be a kid in Fond du Lac, in that community, and to look out at the world in 2030. That's a community that has global impact through their manufacturing industry. And, thinking about what that means from a kid's perspective. It's really, really fascinating to help them plan for their future and help the adults and the philanthropists and the manufacturing, all of the businesses in that community come together to brainstorm, hey, what does it mean to be a kid in our community? And how do we nurture and support that? So for sure, I'm an architect. I draw buildings. I plan things. I decide the way things look. But what is really, really exciting is working and collaborating with communities to make things like that happen. And that Children's Museum has the vision and is making a commitment, not just to build a building today that satisfies codes and regulations and is the thing that they can afford, but for them to be looking at that long-term investment.
Just an example of the importance of communities supporting, whether it's a children's museum, supporting education. I know those are things that you are as passionate about as I am, Peter. Another question. I mean, we sit here and we think about, I mean, you're amazingly well-renowned architect. You've got a great reputation, an amazing and an incredible personality. I know you're in high demand. I know you take on certain projects, and I know that you probably have to pass on other ones. How do you determine, as you think about projects, which ones to take on and which ones to maybe not take on?
Interesting question. And like all businesses, things ebb and flow. Things just sort of turn up unexpectedly. I'll immodestly say I think we're a visionary organization and we help people envision their futures. So the organizations that come to us, I've mentioned a lot of youth and education related ones, but businesses will come to us and they'll ask for something visionary. They're not looking for a short-term solution. They're progressive organizations that are making long-term investments. And with many things, education is at the heart of that. Creating a place that reflects their own values and allows them to lead with their values and tell the stories about what they do through that physical environment. And those are the people that come to us. I can't really explain it other than, we talk at conferences. I have conversations with people like you, and it just ripples through. And we like to tell stories about all of our projects, about the impact they have on that community. I'll give you one example. We designed a science department for a high school here in Chicago. It was about a $10 million investment for that organization. That bought them 5 classrooms. So let's just say that's $2 million a classroom. We had a public space in that configuration that we turned into a 6th classroom, not a permanent 6th classroom, but a space in which students and faculty could come out and work on things that they couldn't do in the classroom. So $2 million per classroom, we gave you a free one. That's quite a good story. The better story is the September that science department opened, 27% more girls signed up for AP Science. A year later, test scores went up 39%. That's an even better value than that free classroom. That 39% increase in test score is the difference between getting into college and getting into your first choice. It's the difference between getting into your first choice college and getting in on a free ride. And that builds a relationship between that student and that school that will last a lifetime. That helps recruit the best faculty, the best students. And this is just a sort of cyclical and constructive thing. That science department builds up that whole school, builds up that entire community. And supports the ambitions that we all have for the future. And those are the types of stories that we like to tell with every client, whether they're a business, a school, a children's museum. And we're very focused on designing that future with our clients.
And those are the stories we love to hear on the Tech Ed podcast. It strikes me, Peter, how often as you talk about this, and I know that the design and I know that the actual science of architecture and so on is a key part and an important part of what you do. But really, every time we ask you a question, it's about the client, it's about the experience, it's about the goal, it's about changing people's lives. And that really, you can just tell in the way that you answer these questions is at the core of what you do. So it's been a pleasure so far to have this discussion. We spend a lot of time on this podcast talking with people in the world of advanced manufacturing, in the world of technology. It isn't a secret, at least to our audience, that there's just a huge absence of skilled talent and for a whole bunch of reasons that in areas in advanced manufacturing and in the skilled trades and so on. I've got to believe you're seeing the same thing in the world of architecture. Is that world facing the same challenges as other STEM related careers? And if so, what's being done to make these career choices more attractive to young people?
There's definitely a shortage of architects coming up. The baby boom generation, there's not as many kids now coming into higher education. Architecture doesn't necessarily have the reputation as being the most prosperous industry to come in. I don't agree with that personally. What we need to do in all of these industries is to ensure that we are attracting the brightest and the best kids from every community, providing them with affordable pathways into education, and making sure that there are people that look like the people that live in every community leading that charge. So it requires a big investment. As president of AIA, I spoke with Representative Clyburn, who is working very hard with administration in DC to alleviate student debt issues. I think that the path to an affordable education is really critical. I think too, adjusting curriculum to be utterly 21st century relevant with the technologies and mindsets and ambitions that industries demand is really critical. In architecture, it seems fundamental to me that every single student of architecture, every single graduate, graduates with the knowledge of how to put together a net zero building. That would seem a very marketable skill, but I do not see curriculum necessarily reflecting that universally just yet. I was quoted in Time magazine last year on this topic. And there is a groundswell at places like Tulane University to develop carbon curricula. And this is really important. And it's critical that industry is partnering with the academy and with our legislators to facilitate this. The economics of it, the relevance of it are really important.
So it sounds like the same challenges that are faced really in so many different spaces within our economy and in many ways the global economy are similarly faced in the world of architecture in terms of inspiring young people toward these careers, giving them affordable access to education and so on. So let's talk now about just the people as they're choosing careers in architecture. You talked about right brain, left brain. Of course, we've got, the analytical side of things and the creative side of things. And I think you could know almost nothing about architecture and still recognize that those two aspects are both important. What are some of those personality types? What if I'm a student, if I'm a young person considering a career, what types of people end up succeeding and having enjoyable and fulfilling careers in the world of architecture?
I would say every kind of person. That there's such a range of talents that are required in a complex industry that architecture construction industry is. If you are detail oriented, I know so many happy project managers in architecture. I know so many happy designers and people who want to be at the forefront of things talking about design. Architects, I think, are particularly empathetic. Perhaps that comes across in this conversation that we're having. If you are interested in making a difference in the world, there is not a profession or a job out there that wouldn't benefit from the training that an architect has. Our ability to design, envision, and realize the future. And you could apply that specifically to buildings and communities. But based on the students I've had, you could apply that to game design. You can apply it to politics. You could apply it to so many vocations. The ability to be a problem solver, an inventor, and a visionary, I think, probably describes the training of an architect. For empathetic people who want to make a difference, I would say architecture is a good pathway.
A great pathway open to, it sounds like, a variety of people. Some folks might think of it as just just an analytical or a kind of a science and math-based career pathway. Others might think of it as a creative and a design and a visionary type pathway. And it sounds like wherever you are on that spectrum, on one end or the other, or any place in the middle, there's a place for you in the field of architecture. And that is certainly coming through in the discussion that we're having today, Peter. And then going back to just the fact that in the end, it's really about changing lives and influencing the world for the better. And for somebody who wants to make a difference, who wants to look back on an amazing career like the one that you've had and forward to the many amazing things that you'll do in the future, it sounds like just a fantastic career choice for our young people to be considering. Peter, we've had just such a great conversation today. You're so insightful. You're such a deep thinker. You have such a wonderful and refreshing way of looking at the world. One of the questions we love to ask our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast, and in as much as we have a number of young people that listen to the podcast, if you could give one piece of advice to a high school sophomore as they consider their future career pathway, what would that advice be?
Do what you love and have fun.
Perfect.
Work hard towards those goals. I only do the things that I love to do. I also happen to have to surround myself with the people that do the other things as well. And finding that balance in the organization is really critical to their success.
Really, really important. So do what you love and have fun. And what I've found, and it almost sounds obvious, is that working hard is way easier to do when you're doing things that you love and doing things that you have fun with. We certainly love and have plenty of fun with our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast, and you're no exception to that, Peter. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the podcast. We've learned a tremendous amount. We really appreciate you taking some time.
Great. Matt, thank you so much. Thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.